If you've ever felt something tighten in your chest when February arrives, like you're bracing for the same recycled lessons, the same handful of names, the same polished version of our story, then you already understand what I want to say. Black History Month, the way it's often delivered, can feel like a small box someone hands you and expects you to be grateful for. A month, a unit, a slideshow, a few acceptable heroes and a few acceptable victories. And then, when March comes, the world quietly returns to its usual forgetfulness, as if the truth of Black life can be scheduled and contained. But Black history doesn't live in a box. It lives in the body. It lives in family language and kitchen sounds and church parking lots and the way we can feel danger before it speaks. It lives in the tenderness we practice anyway, even when tenderness was never promised to us. Black history is not something that happened. It is still happening, still echoing, still shaping the choices we make, the burdens we carry, and the joy we insist on. It is deeper than a celebration. It is a continuum. It is a memory with its full weight. It is costly, complicated, inherited, and still miraculous. The Black American story is a story of stolen time and stolen kinship, yes, but it is also a story of culture surviving the most intentional attempts to erase it. Enslavement was not only forced labor, it was an engineered interruption of lineage. Families were broken by design, names were stripped, languages were severed, and people were treated as property in a system that wanted Black life to be only useful, never sacred. And yet, even inside that, something persisted. People found each other again and again. They made family out of whoever stood near them long enough to be trusted. They carried rhythms, prayers, proverbs, recipes, ways of speaking and singing, fragments that became a whole culture over time. Black resilience wasn't a personality trait, it was an adaptation to the impossible. It was a way of staying human in a world invested in your dehumanization. And after emancipation, that world did not suddenly become moral. It reorganized. Reconstruction promised repair, and then the country abandoned the promise. Violence didn't disappear, it became policy, practice, and local custom. Jim Crow was not simply segregation, it was a complete social order that demanded Black people shrink themselves for white comfort while still extracting Black labor and Black brilliance. Terror enforced it. Lynching, intimidation, the constant threat that you could be punished simply for existing too freely. And this is where people get confused about history. They imagine the past as worse, as if the present is naturally better, as if time automatically produces justice. But what time actually produces is consequence. And the consequences of those eras are with us because structures have long memories, even when people claim they don't. When you look at the racial wealth gap today, you are not looking at individual choices floating in a vacuum. You are looking at accumulated advantage and accumulated exclusion across generations. Who got to own property, who got to pass something down, who got to borrow at reasonable rates, who got to be protected by law when they built something. The Federal Reserve, looking at the Survey of Consumer Finances, shows that even with gains in Black wealth in recent years, the typical Black family's wealth is still a small fraction of the typical white family's wealth, on the order of around the mid-teens percentage in 2022, according to their analysis. That gap isn't a mystery. It is history doing what history does when it is left uncorrected. And still, listen to me, Black people built anyway. We built under constraint. We built while being watched. We built while being denied. We built institutions that were never meant to exist because the country did not plan for Black flourishing. It planned for Black extraction. Churches became more than churches. They became organizing centers, mutual aid banks, schools, sanctuaries, places where we practiced leadership when leadership was denied to us everywhere else. Black fraternal organizations, women's clubs, mutual aid societies, these were not side stories. They were infrastructure. They were how people survived when official systems were closed or hostile. Black schools were formed in the shadow of violence. Black teachers taught while knowing that literacy had once been criminalized for us. And when it comes to culture, understand this. Black music is not entertainment alone. It is archive. Spirituals carried grief and hope. Blues named pain without apology. Jazz insisted on improvisation, on freedom inside form, when the world wanted Black people rigid and controlled. Later, hip-hop rose from communities abandoned by policy and then over-policed by force, and it became a global language of testimony. When people say Black history, they often mean laws and leaders. But Black history is also what we created to stay alive inside those laws. It's our spiritual technologies, our humor, our style, our ability to make a way out of no way, and not because it was romantic, but because it was necessary. And then there's the origin of this month itself, because even Black History Month has a lineage, and it matters. In 1926, historian Carter G. Woodson launched Negro History Week through the organization now known as the Association for the Study of African American Life and History. The purpose wasn't to create a neat holiday, it was to correct erasure, to insist that Black history was American history and had been deliberately excluded from mainstream education. Decades later, this expanded into Black History Month, and February became the container, not because Black history fits in February, but because the country needed a formal interruption to its habit of forgetting. So when you feel that tension, when you feel like this month is too small, your spirit is not being dramatic. You're responding to the truth. The container was never meant to be the whole story. It was meant to be a doorway. But too often, people treat the doorway like a room. And we are not a room. We are a world. Now let's talk about something that rarely gets said with tenderness. Resilience has a cost. Black resilience is praised constantly, sometimes in ways that feel like a compliment, and sometimes in ways that feel like a demand. As if we were born to be strong, so nobody else has to change. As if our strength is proof that the pressure is acceptable. But resilience is a response to injury, and injury leaves marks. In public health, researchers have long described how chronic stress from racism and structural adversity can show up in the body over time, through inflammation, through higher rates of hypertension, through premature wear. And recently, a large study discussed in the context of the weathering hypothesis pointed again to the way long-term stress and discrimination can help explain disparities in health outcomes and mortality. I'm not saying this to make us afraid. I'm saying it to tell the truth. You don't have to romanticize endurance. You don't have to pretend it didn't hurt. One of the sharpest examples is maternal mortality. The CDC's national data show that Black women die from maternal causes at dramatically higher rates than white women. In 2023, the maternal mortality rate for Black women was 50.3 per 100,000 live births, compared with 14.5 for white women. Those are not personal choices. Those are systems, access, bias, quality of care, the way pain is dismissed, the way warning signs are missed, the way Black women are expected to carry risk quietly. And if that reality doesn't make this month feel urgent, then we're not paying attention. Because history is not only what happened to our ancestors, it is what is still happening to our bodies. Now, the reason I'm going this deep is because I refuse to speak to you like you're a child being given a simplified lesson. My luminaries, you deserve the full story because you're living inside the afterlife of it. And you deserve language that connects the past to the present without flattening either one. So yes, we talk about slavery and Jim Crow and civil rights. We must. But we also talk about what came after and what continues. The Great Migration, when millions of Black people moved from the rural South to northern and western cities, not just chasing jobs, but fleeing terror and seeking breathing room. And then the ways housing discrimination and redlining created segregated neighborhoods with fewer resources while wealth accumulated elsewhere. We talk about the fact that Black veterans returned from wars that promised freedom abroad and met exclusion at home. We talk about the fact that even after landmark legal wins, the backlash never slept. It simply changed uniforms. And we talk about the present moment with clarity. Because right now, many of our communities are navigating a specific kind of fatigue: economic pressure, housing costs, healthcare fear, political whiplash, and cultural gaslighting, being told that racism is over while watching it shape outcomes in real time. And here is where I want to be careful and honest. The goal is not to make you feel doomed. The goal is to give you context so you stop blaming yourself for things history is still doing. Pew Research has documented how many Black Americans describe having to work harder to succeed and how experiences of discrimination shape their views of institutions and progress. That isn't a mindset problem. That's perception informed by lived reality. And at the same time, I need you to remember this other truth. Black people have never been only what happened to them. We have always been what we made from it. We have always been more than the injury. When the world tried to define us by struggle alone, we still found ways to define ourselves by beauty, by intellect, by faith, by kinship, by craft. We produce scholars and builders, artists and healers, organizers and entrepreneurs, farmers and teachers, nurses and poets, people who never made a textbook but made a life that kept others alive. Sometimes history gets narrated through great men and their speeches. But Black history is also women braiding hair on a porch while passing down warnings and wisdom. It's grandparents raising grandchildren because the world was unstable and still making that home feel safe. It's aunties and uncles stepping in as second parents. It's neighbors becoming family. It's the way we show up for funerals and graduations like both are sacred. It's the way we can laugh in the middle of sorrow without disrespecting the sorrow, because laughter, for us, has often been air. So let's sit with this. Black History Month is not a month of perfection. It's a month of remembrance and recognition. It's a month to study not only victories, but patterns, to see how policy becomes lifestyle and how lifestyle becomes stereotype, and to reverse that logic with truth. It's a month to tell our children not only what was taken, but what was preserved. Not only who tried to erase us, but how we refuse to disappear. And it's a month to reframe resilience as something that deserves support, not something that excuses neglect. Because I don't want you to hear resilience and feel pressured to be unbreakable. I want you to hear resilience and feel connected. Connected to a lineage of people who kept going, yes, but also people who rested when they could, who leaned on each other, who prayed, who sang, who built circles of care because no one survives alone. So here's the arc I want to give you tonight. We come from interruption, and we made continuity. We come from theft, and we made culture. We come from lawlessness disguised as law, and we still found ways to create order in our communities, order rooted in care. And now, in the present, we are being asked to do something that might be the deepest work of all, to remember ourselves beyond survival, to insist that our lives are not only responses to pressure, but expressions of purpose, to cultivate joy that is not shallow but rooted, joy that knows what it has outlived, to invest in health not as a trend, but as repair, to build wealth not as an aesthetic, but as a shield for future generations, to create art not as content, but as testimony, to tell our stories not for applause, but for inheritance. And my luminaries, if you're tired, I want you to hear me clearly. Tired does not mean weak. Tired means you've been carrying something real, and you don't have to carry it alone. The month may be February, but the work is year-round, and the work is not only public, it is also private. It is the quiet decision to learn your people's names, to ask an elder what they endured and what they loved, to build a family tree, even if it has gaps, and to treat those gaps not as shame but as evidence of what was done, to read, to study, to sit with the discomfort of truth without turning away. Because the most dangerous kind of forgetting is the kind that makes you think you have no lineage behind you and no future ahead of you. The world benefits when Black people feel isolated, when we think we are the first to face what we're facing, when we forget that we have survived cycles before. That's why memory is power, not nostalgia, memory. And that's why this month matters, even when it's imperfect. It's a collective pause, a ritual interruption, a chance to say out loud, we are still here, and we know why. We know what it cost. We know what it means. So I want to end where I began, but deeper. Black History Month is not a celebration that asks you to smile through pain. It is a mirror that asks you to recognize the full truth, injury and ingenuity, grief and glory, brutality and brilliance. And when you look into that mirror, I want you to see yourself not as an accident, not as a footnote, not as someone who has to earn their worth through endless strength. I want you to see yourself as continuity, as living evidence that the story did not end where they tried to end it, as a luminary, someone who carries light not because the world made it easy, but because your people have always found ways to keep a flame alive. Let February remind you, yes, but let it also restore you. Let it return you to your lineage. Let it make you gentler with yourself and fiercer with the truth. And let it plant this in your spirit. We have survived enough to deserve more than survival. We have carried enough to deserve rest. We have built enough to deserve protection. And we have loved enough to deserve a future that doesn't require our suffering as proof. Luminaries, you are not behind. You are not late. You are not alone. You are the continuation, still carrying, still building, still becoming. Dear luminaries, happy, blessed Black History Month. Sending you love.